Welcome to another TerranScapes video. This video is a little bit different than the ones that I normally post in that I'm not actually showcasing the terrain as much as I wanted to discuss the issue of scale in miniatures. The question has come up recently with a couple of the projects that I've done on, well, is this suitable for X game, 40K, Lord of the Rings, Flames of War, etc. So I thought I'd take a minute and discuss one of the predominant features of the boards, a couple of them actually, do rivers, and I'll show you some forests, and do a little comparison of the different scales of miniatures and what this actually would equate to in terms of to scale to the miniatures being used. So first, there's predominantly two different scales of miniatures being used in the majority of the games being played. There are 15mm miniatures, which are Flames of War. Games Workshops are supposed to be 28mm. Some games push to 30mm, they call that heroic scale. I'm going to call this 28mm for the purpose of our discussion today. So, first, you have to assume 28mm for a normal man Games Workshop model. 28mm is very close to 1 inch. It's almost exactly. An inch is 2.54 centimeters. This is 2.8 centimeters. So roughly every inch of height is equal to 6 feet in scale. All right. Now, because these are closer to 28, it's a little bit over, right? It's so every inch is actually, or it's a little bit under. So every inch is actually equal to about 5.5 feet. All right, because these are a little bigger than 1 inch, and they're 6 feet tall. Follow me? So here we have a river that is 5 inches wide. This ford is 5. Let me see if I can do both these handles. 5 inches wide. Therefore, for these figures to cross this ford, they have to cross 5 inches times 5.5, right? So 5 inches times 5.5 is equal to roughly 27.5 feet. So this would be a roughly 27-foot crossing for them. Bigger than a creek, but not quite a raging river. All right. Actually, when you look at it, right, it does look kind of creek-sized scale. We have a small river that runs through our town. I'd say that the small river is actually probably about 50% larger than this. So this would be like a minor tributary feeding into a river. So let's take a look at our 15mm models. 15mm, so remember, for every 15mm high, it's equal to 6 feet in terms of the game scale. So there are roughly, think of it this way, there are roughly 2 of these guys in every inch. So roughly, the same river, we've got our German troops getting ready to cross the ford to assault, pick your generic European town here. When they cross this river is 5 inches. For them, in terms of game terms, this river is going to be equal to a 50-foot crossing, which is actually a fairly realistic sized river for a large, heavily flowing river. All right, 50 feet. All right. So, if we wanted to look at trees, we can look at it in the same way, and I'll show you that in just a second. So in taking a look at trees, the same principles apply. When compared to a 28mm model, 28mm, a little bit over 1 inch high, every inch is 6 feet. Here we have trees that are roughly, let me get a ruler out here, I'll show you. They're roughly 2 inches high for the little trees, maybe 2.5 on some of them, to about 4 inches high on the medium trees. We're going about 6 inches high on, I can show it to parallel here, 6 inches high to a tall tree. All right, so remember that if we're comparing it to a 28mm model, each inch is a roughly approximate 6 feet to scale. So these trees are going to be 2 inches high, so they're going to be about 11 feet tall, roughly. All right, 2 inches to a 6-inch tree in the back. 6-inch tree. I'm going to put a ring wraith. It's going to chop it down for us. The ring wraith compared to this tall tree here, all right, this tall tree is about 6 times his height, 36 feet, 40 feet roughly. All right, maybe just a pinch Actually, it's a pinch under 36 feet because he's slightly taller than an inch. So it's actually probably closer to about 32 feet tall. All right. Now, when you compare it to the 15mm models, 15mm models, each one is 6 feet tall to scale. So basically for every inch, you're looking at about 10 feet. 2 inches, 20 feet. 4 inches, 40 feet. 6 inches, 60 feet. All right. Now, 60 feet may sound big, but a large number of trees will reach about 60 feet in height. Maples, white pines, oaks. That's a common tree height for a mature tree. So these are in line with a well-established older tree, and you can see the way I've planted them. I try to put the largest trees in the middle, partly because it's just a little more visually interesting to have everything sort of peaking in the middle, but it also represents, perhaps the stand is oldest in the middle and has been spreading out, so you get these larger, older trees in the middle, and you get the younger trees that are quite a bit younger and smaller coming out the side. We can also make the same comparison to our hills, which I'll show you as well. Alright, so taking a look at the hills, these hills are an inch tall for the foam, and that's used as a convention primarily for ease of gameplay. If we wanted to make hills, which are, say, 40 feet tall in relative scale, for these guys, that would be fairly straightforward. We'd need to make it 4 inches tall. Still, a fairly arduous hill to game on, as it's going to have a really large slope, and it's going to occupy a tremendous amount of the game area. So we opt for a slightly smaller scale hill to allow for more tactical variations within the 4x6 playing area that most games would be played on. When we look at the ring wraith here, now of course this 1 inch hill is actually just a touch shorter than he is. And again, it's used for convention to represent that, but actually is almost out of scale for 28mm, which is why I sometimes offer 1.5 inch hills, which actually give you a true line of sight, which of course now is more important, line of sight blockage, which is now more important for 40K, for instance. But by giving that variation in the terrain, and by making it just a little bit out of scale, all right, obviously this would be passable to the ring wraith if he wanted to climb this over, and this was a magically animated figure. But by allowing it to be sort of in between too big and sort of just right, too small and just right, it gives you that flexibility to declare, this is impassable for the game. And you can visually see that that's going to look impassable. Or you can say it's difficult ground, which is a little bit more accurate perhaps to scale. Or you could say it doesn't impede movement at all, which is believable for the scales involved. So there's quite a bit of flexibility, and when I try to apply the materials for it, the shrubs and etc., I try to put it at a place where it's going to work for most scales. And one of the nice things about a lot of railroad material, in terms of like woodland scenics, foliage and stuff, is it's really designed to be used at multiple scales believably. Of course, because the railroad industry has no standardization really in terms of what's the dominant scale. What I did is I went to a railroad convention once, and I picked up a flyer that has all the different scales that railroads are done in. In fact, there's some that aren't even included on here. We have Z scale, which is very, very small, which is closer to 6mm Mech Warrior. Then you have HO scale, which is just actually a little bit bigger than Flames of War, which is 15mm. HO is actually 20mm, very close. Up to S scale and O scale, and in between these we have our Lord of the Rings, we have our Star Wars and Starship Troopers and AT-43. Those are all 28 to 30. And then of course you have your collectibles or some of your older fashioned historical wargamers, which play in 54mm, which actually doesn't match to anything as well, but it's very close to #1 scale. And then, of course, you have even larger scales, G scale. So when they manufacture scale model scenery materials, they really try to make it so that it blends with a variety of scales, because they know that there's a lot of the market that varies out there, and they want it to match up to it. So I hope that you find this somewhat useful, as I think scale is an interesting aspect of miniature wargaming, and it can vary quite a bit. And I have been receiving multiple questions about, is this appropriate for this size, and etc. And so I thought I'd take you just a few minutes through, give you a little rundown about how big some of these things are compared to the figures, how you determine the scale, and and I don't know, I'll hopefully give you something a little interesting to think about when it comes to wargaming that's a little different than my normal videos.